So this is going to be kind of a broad overview of a lot of information that we've collected about the lives of graduates of arts training institutions, mixed in with some other research that's been done over the years, to get sort of a snapshot of of the life of a creative worker, creative graduate, what they're doing with their lives. And I sort of thought I'd set it up by trying to think about sort of what are some of the dominant myths around a life in the arts. So many of you may not ascribe to these myths, but they, I think, generally would represent our popular understanding of the artist in society. So just to give you a sense of where some of this data is coming from, the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project, planning for it started about a decade ago. We started collecting data in 2008. We have now, this is a snapshot of kind of a dashboard. If you go to the Indiana University website, it's a fun graphic to play around with to explore the data in a pretty easy way. SNAP is a partnership between Indiana University and Vanderbilt University, funded by about 6 or 7 funders. Originally, it was about a $4.5 million investment. The Surdna Foundation was the major investor. And the intent of it was to really try and understand what happens to people that graduate from arts training institutions. People that run these institutions say they don't know what happens to their graduates. That's how the conversation began. And now, 8 years later, we have collected more than we've collected information from more than 100,000 graduates. We've been doing this since 2008. 250 arts institutions and programs have participated. So it includes independent art schools, conservatories, arts programs within larger research universities, graduate programs, undergraduate programs. We actually have some arts high schools in this list as well. Let me just, within, I think 2 years, this will be the largest arts database in the country. So it'll be bigger than SPPA, the Survey of Public Participation in the Arts, in terms of the total sample size. It's the largest alumni, it will be the largest alumni survey or postgraduate survey in any field. So the National Academy does a survey of recent graduates, but this will soon surpass that. So it's kind of nice to see the arts leading, at least in one area of research and data. We're typically lagging. Okay, so everybody, you know the saying, everybody wants a Picasso hanging on their wall, but nobody wants one standing in their living room. Meaning, no parent wants to see their kid come in and say, what I really want to be is an artist, Mom, Dad. That this idea, scares the practical older generation who see there's no future in the arts. So one of the reasons why parents worry about that is the thought that artists are either underemployed or unemployable. And there's some evidence of this. So the current population survey, this is 2004, 2013. So unemployment rates for all workers, let's say just take the 2013, is 6.6%. For professionals, that's 3.6. For artists, it's 7.1. And we tend to treat artists like professionals. So you often will hear that artists are twice as unemployed as other comparable professions. So that seems concerning. I guess that is some evidence that the myth may be true. Oh, look, that slide's out of place. We can go right past that. Okay, so that's not showing up that great. I wonder if we should turn the... I think the real problem is my choice of font color, not the light. So I will make note of that and improve it next time. So from our survey, we actually get a different result. We find it's closer to other professionals. 4% of those 100,000 respondents to our survey say they're currently unemployed and looking for work. So there's a couple reasons why that may be the case. The first is that artists are both both have degrees from higher education, and some do not have college degrees, right? So when you just look at artists, you're mixing the professional class and the non-professional class. So that's part of that, what accounts for that. But what I think is really going on here is the difference between the way we asked the question and the way the current population survey asked the question. So the current population survey says, did you do any work for pay in the last week? This is how you know whether you're employed. Now think about an artist's career. First of all, 60% of all the graduates from arts training programs have been self-employed at some point in their lives. And many of them are working on getting gigs, but they don't have paying gigs every week. So this is actually empirically easy to test. No one's done it yet. But to do, to add a question perhaps to our next SNAP survey that asks the employment question both ways and see what the difference is. But I'm convinced that's a large part of the reason why we see higher unemployment rates with the current population survey. So nonlinear career paths is partly representative of what we think about the arts, that you're not going to be able to pursue you're going to be all over the place as an artist. You have to work in whatever job is available. But it's not just artists, right? I think this is an important general finding that 25% of 18 to 44-year-olds held 15 or more jobs in their lifetime. The average number of jobs now is 11. So everybody's kind of increasingly in what we would call sort of a protean economy. You're working in lots of different sectors, and
those kind of jobs or just jobs?
Those are different. Those are not. If you were a contractor, you wouldn't count all your different contracts. Those are different
shifting categories.
Shifting categories.
Is that over only this population or the entire working population?
That's for that age group from 18 to 44.
For all occupation, for all.
Right.
Not just artists.
1/3 of U.S. workers say they expect to be working in a different job next year. So I think actually an interesting question, rather than just saying are artists more likely to be unemployed at any moment in time than the rest of the population, I think in this kind of contingent economy, the more interesting question is sort of what's the time between jobs? How long does it take someone who ends a job to find another job? Who can get re-employed quicker? Who can pivot? Who can adjust? Who can reinvent themselves? And I would claim that that artists are particularly good at this. They've been having to work in this way for a long time. Again, for further research to see whether that's in fact true, to actually look at time between jobs rather than the unemployment rate at any one time. So artists are underpaid. Is underpaid one word? I think that, is that one word? Is that okay? Looks funny. So the center at Georgetown, Center for Education and the Workforce, has done a couple of reports that have taken the current population survey, which now includes a question about your major in college. This is new. And so what has that allowed us to do? It has allowed us now to rank majors by how much they make or how employable they are. And the arts don't always look that good in these kinds of rankings. If you look at this is actually from the National Endowment for the Arts, who looked at the census data. Artists do, in fact, make less money compared to other comparable professions. So what is that, about a 13% difference in wage? So they do earn less. Now, if you combine an arts degree with something else, then you actually make more than someone who doesn't have the arts degree. So there's some economic value to that arts degree. It just has to be combined with something else. So a scientist who's also an artist does better than a scientist who's not an artist. But I think the real question is sort of truth in advertising. So it may be true. So if you look at the Georgetown report and you really want to, all you're going to college for is to make money, then you should be a petroleum engineer. Right? They make about $120,000. on average. So that's what you should do, right? But that's not really how we decide to go to college. That's not where all the value is. So the truth in advertising would be, yeah, artists get paid 12% less, but they're one of the happiest professions. Right? This comes from the General Social Survey. Right? Artists are happier than lawyers, financial managers, high school teachers. There are two professions that are happier than artists. Those are clergy and firefighters. But in general, right, choosing to be an artist leads to a high level of satisfaction. And we found that in our survey as well. So not only are they happy with their work, but again, the mythology that an arts graduate is unhappy that they went to art school because it leads to all these poor outcomes. 76% would attend the same institution again and get the same degree. This is the SNAP data. 90% say their overall experience in art school is either very good or excellent. 87% are satisfied with their current jobs. 82% are satisfied with their ability to be creative in their work. And being creative in your work is actually important. And in another study I did of college seniors, 92% of college seniors said that a career that allows them to be creative is important. In fact, that was, I can't remember, it was either the first or the second most important criteria for choosing a career that allows you to be creative.
You didn't give the comparative statistics, so back this one.
You're right. Compared to other...
Yeah, on the screen before this, I mean, you're going through that litany of wonderful things. Like before that, the one where we were saying 75%. I mean, what percent would attend that are not arts majors?
Okay.
Is that high or low? I don't know what it means.
So since we're only surveying arts graduates in this data, I can't tell you that information. So...
and it could be really bad if it's 70.
No,
One out of every four would not.
let's do a comparative sample right now. So how many people, thinking about your undergraduate degree in this room, would do the exact same degree in the same institution? Okay, so it's about half. So that's our comparison. Sometimes you can only do what you can do with the data. But of course, artists, they're not going to art school to make money. And I think this is interesting. So dancers and choreographers are the least likely of any of the arts fields to make more than $50,000 in 2010. Right? Only 9% of them made more than $50,000 a year. But they are the happiest with their job. Right? Again, that this relationship between money and job satisfaction is pretty tenuous. So other evidence, this is a recent study by Steiner and Schneider in Germany. This is the average satisfaction with personal income. So even though they're making less money, performing visual artists and performing artists alone are about the same average satisfaction with their income, right? So they're not expecting to make a lot of money, so they're more satisfied with not making a lot of money. The argument in that paper is that part of the reason why artists are particularly happy with their careers is because they get to work independently, they get to work on tasks that allow them to be creative. So this is a question: do you decide yourself how to complete tasks at work? And you see that the respondents who are working in the arts are about 75% more likely to say that's true. Okay, so how about this one? So arts graduates do not get jobs as artists. They work as waiters or in food services. But the number of SNAP graduates who are working in food services is 3%. I don't know how that compares. We could do another survey of how many people in the room have worked in food services. So it's certainly not what we would have expected. And those that wanted to become artists, for the most part, did become artists at some point in their lives. So this shows us that 81% of the graduates who intended to be artists became artists at some point in their lives. Currently, 60% are working as professional artists in some capacity, and 21% of those have stopped working as artists, but did so at some point in the past. And now we do have some comparisons, though, here, Larry. I know how your mind's working now. This is what you want to see. So this is not from the SNAP survey, but this is from the survey of recent college graduates. And I think what's I'm never comfortable quoting Donald Rumsfeld, but I think he got this one right. So it turns out that all these really practical majors, graduates also don't end up working in what they studied, right? So only 56% of those who got a degree in accounting say that their a job after college was closely related to what they studied. So actually, music majors do better than accounting majors in terms of actually getting to work in the area in which they studied.
For the artists, on the previous slide as well, it's just saying they are currently full-time employed, so they're currently 60%. Is that currently full-time employed in that, or do they participate in some kind of art activity?
They make some money from...
Make some money.
So they're a professional artist, but most are not working full-time, getting 100% of their income from their art. That's another truth about the arts, is that they're working, often in 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. Okay, so, again, this kind of leads to that protean career idea that is not really an easy pathway between what you study and what you do. Okay, here's another mythology. Artists are narrow and specialized, right? And we hear about the 10,000 hours that's required to be really good at anything, but we see this used often as it relates to being a musician or being a fine artist, that it requires that much sort of specialized investment. And that's true, right? A successful artist is obviously well trained in their craft. But what we're learning is actually that when artists are more broad, when they have a sort of jack of all trades toolkit, they're actually more employable. They have wider social networks. They make more money. So even though our arts training institutions are focused on specialization, the reality of the lives that graduates lead is that if they're able to broaden themselves, play more than one instrument, in this case jazz musicians play across multiple genres, instead of being seen as sort of a dilettante, they're actually more successful in navigating their careers, if success is money and the social networks that lead to jobs. This is from the Future of Music Coalition study of artists, and they asked musicians sort of how many different roles do you play, and these are the variety of roles. You can be a composer, a recording artist, a performer, a session musician, a teacher, or manager. And again, the modal here is playing at least 3 roles, but with almost half of all respondents playing 3 or more roles. So again, evidence that artists are working in a variety of capacities. Okay, myth 6. Artists are flighty. They're too focused on their own ideas and expression to be much practical use. I think when you think about, you want to go to IBM, to their consulting division, and say, I think you really ought to be employing artists because they have all the skills that you actually need. They're non-routine problem solvers. They can deal with ambiguity. They're good collaborators. They know how to revise their work. They know how to sort of do associational thinking, analogical thinking. They make connections. So, right, this is good for creativity. It should be. Most of them are going to say, really, you want me to recruit not in the business school but in the art school, right? So there's a sense that these art students aren't really going to be able to solve practical problems, and this is just not, this is just not true. And I don't have statistics for this as much as just evidence of artists who are working on all kinds of practical solutions. This is one of my favorite. Does anyone know how to say Natalie's last name? Jeremijenko. The Feral Robotic Dog Project. Natalie's at NYU now. She was at Yale before. She has hacked into these toy robotic dogs and put in sensors that detect whether there's contaminants in the soil at playgrounds. So, and if there are, the dogs start to bark loudly, and then health inspectors can be called in. So this has been used in several urban places. Just an idea of a way in which an artist reconceives of kind of how we can identify areas where we need intervention without, in sort of our everyday routine of living. Part of it is just there's obviously an artistic piece to this, so you could probably come up with other kinds of sensors, not give them to kids, right? I mean, she's an artist, so the idea of using these, it wouldn't, if you just had a science team, a technology team, probably wouldn't come up with a robotic dog, but this connects people, their families, kids to the issues. It raises awareness in addition to identifying contaminants. I don't know if you've seen this on YouTube. This is in Stockholm. It's part of actually a Volkswagen-funded project called the Fun Theory. It's a really great video if you haven't seen it. But they had a team of artists and engineers basically design these musical stairs so that if you go up the stairs, they make sounds. So you're playing the piano. And the idea was, could you get more people to use the stairs instead of the escalator? And 66% more people used the stairs after this artist engineering team invested in that public project. The Superflex is a Danish arts collective. Has come up with a way to cheaply and efficiently provide energy to rural villages through the collection of methane gas, those from human and cow feces. You can create enough energy for cooking and lighting for a family over 12 hours. Again, right, these are artists that are really working at the boundaries of social problems, of engineering solutions. Mel Chin's work. Does anyone know this project? Pay Dirt and Fundred. He's worried about lead in soil. And he has inspired kids from all over the country to produce these $100 bills, designed, their own design, and he's collecting them in this armored truck, which is biofuel, and he's going to deliver them all to Congress. $300 million in creative cash, asking Congress to do something about this problem. Elizabeth King from Virginia Commonwealth University has been doing interesting work around prosthetics for her puppetry and her animation videos. But the work that she's doing to make prosthetics capture more of the real human dimension, so they're more natural, has been important in the prosthetics industry. Okay, so I think there's plenty of evidence that artists are actually can solve important problems, health problems, environmental problems, urban problems, design problems, and they're doing it all the time. Okay, so we also have the myth that artists are on the periphery of the economy. Now, this is, for those of you who've been studying, this is not going to be new news, but I still think we're enchanted by the idea that artists kind of are living outside of economic life, the Bohemian mythologies that have been passed on for over a century, and I think they're still present in art schools, right? I think the identity of what it means to be an artist in art school is to really not be part of not dedicate yourself to being part of economic man, but to stand outside of that. So these are just, statistics that many of you are aware of. the copyright industries, which don't include all artists, but artists are clearly driving a lot of copyright in publishing and film and music, are now $931 billion, 3 times the value of construction industry. So, in 2008, when the economy tanked, most of the articles were about the devastation of housing starts to the U.S. economy. But our intellectual property is now a much bigger part of our economy than housing. In terms of exports, copyright industries, this is 2007 data, it's a little old, 125 billion, a bigger export than chemical and allied products, motor vehicles, agriculture. Again, this is a big part of our economy. I like this slide. It just shows how important design is in our lives, and many of our artists are going into design, but Ikea claims 1 in 10 British citizens are conceived in one of their beds, and more people go to Ikea on Sunday than go to church. And then there's obviously plenty of evidence of the gentrifying effects of the arts, or a more a nicer way to think about it is that the arts do bring property values up, and if there's a way to, that this causes problems for those that have to move out of their homes, but there's plenty of evidence that, at least in terms of regeneration of neighborhoods and property values, that when people invest in the arts and in artists, that we see property values go up. So this is a study that was done in New England of, this is the standard deviation increase in per capita cultural spend, and this is how much it gives you in additional property values for homes in that neighborhood. I just thought it was interesting.
When was this done?
This was done, I think, in 2011. So I just think it's interesting to think about, other things. I mean, I've just bought a house in Arizona, so we're looking at all these comps and appraisals, and you know that if you add rooms, that you get a sort of a boost in the value of your house. The property size, the lot size matters. But if you live in a neighborhood where the community spends a lot on artists, those are pretty significant added dollars to the value of your house. 16.1% of arts graduates are founders of their own businesses or nonprofits. Again, Larry, I don't know. I really tried today to find the comparable number, but I could not find any research on how many people in the U.S. have started their own companies at some point in their lives. But there's a number of arts graduates are starting businesses, not just being independent contractors, but really founding organizations or enterprises. I thought this was interesting. I guess it's expected, but these are cohorts of graduates, so people who graduated between 2009 to 2013, and then 1983 and before. This kind of bothers me that there's no other bars left of this, because I'm here. And I don't want to be at the end of the chart. I want to be in the middle here. Clearly, as you're getting older, the chances of starting a business increase. So I don't know if that's counterintuitive or if that's what you would expect. I think we tend to think that all these kids are graduating and they're starting their own businesses right away, and they do. Some do, but typically it's not till later in your career, when you have better networks, better experience, do you start a business. This founding's by discipline. If you're just interested in what's the difference, dancers are most likely to start their own companies. Architecture, music composition, and music history. I'm not sure what the music.
So arts businesses that they're founding, not just any business.
No, they're any business.
So can this be explained by the requirements of the tax code or municipal law?
So say more.
Well, I have a art studio in a commercial space.
Okay.
Because of that, the city of Chicago requires me to be a business.
To be a business.
So whether or not I want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you would consider yourself more to be just an independent contractor or independent selling your own work, but you would be considered a business if you were answering the survey. Yeah. Our graduates in the SNAP survey say the one thing they wish they had more of in college was management and business skills. So almost half of them say that this is something that they really, if they had to go back, this is what they'd want more of. Again, our art schools aren't really, some of them are playing with us around the edges, but they're not really taking this seriously. So this is your own Theaster Gates. And I mean, he's just, you know, a great example of an enterprising artist. I guess this is from the New York Times. Gates fashioned a kind of circular economy where his urban interventions were being financed by the sale of artworks created from the materials salvaged from the interventions. So I guess in this space, his bank in the South Side, he auctioned off 1,000 pieces of marble and had them inscribed, "The Art We Trust," for $5,000 each to raise money. So he was given this for $1 by the city. And then, do you know if he was successful? Did he raise the $3.5 million that he needed to?
It's still not developed yet.
It hasn't been developed. But the idea is, I mean, he has several projects now where he's taking materials that have been salvaged from teardowns and using them in art projects that he can sell and then reinvest in the properties. But again, I think a good example of an enterprising artist. Okay, so myth number 7, right? That if you want to be successful, you got to be in New York or LA. Maybe Chicago, but we still think of New York and LA as the sort of central places you have to be a working artist these days. The reality is that artists really live and work everywhere. So New York and LA account for 14% of cultural sector employment. Maybe it's still high. Is that high or low? You're just going to have to deal with that ambiguity. I know it's uncomfortable. In Ann Markison's work, lots of second-tier cities that you might not expect were well above the location quotient in terms of their density of artists as a percentage of the workforce. So Nashville, Portland, San Diego, Minneapolis, Boston, and Miami. Right? These are all places where artists can go and make a life, and they're pretty robust artistic communities. And graduates kind of know this to be true. That is, increasingly, they're choosing to maybe live where they went to school instead of graduating and immediately moving to New York to try and make it. So 35.5% of our graduates actually stay and work and try and make a life in the community where they went to school, where they've already started building networks and relationships, right, which are so important for an artistic career. So just picking up and leaving is not easy for them. But I thought what was interesting about it, I said, well, maybe that's because most of the art schools are in the Northeast, so that's kind of where the arts jobs are anyway. But actually, 61.5% of those who graduate in a school in the Southwest are likely to stay and work in the community where they went to school. So the Northeast is kind of at the bottom of this. So if people are staying and working not in New York, but in a variety of other regions in the country. Okay, myth 8. Artists are not team players. They're free-spirited, egoistic, independent. So those of you that, if you've read this classic, it's all about the fact that artists, no matter how, even if you pick just the poet working alone, if you think about all the people that have to be part of making a poem, published, the editors, the printers, the people who came up with the font, right? There's always a collaborative network of people engaged in any art project. Artists have got to work collaboratively. They can never work alone. And just the credits at the end of any film is evidence alone of sort of the extremely complex collaborative process that art making is. Film being one of the most, but all art forms are. So related, I'm moving a little bit because I don't really have any evidence of how collaborative their working environment is. I mean, it'd be interesting to think about how you would measure that, whether artists in fact are collaborating with more people than, let's say, physicians or teachers or other occupations. I don't know. but the question is, in this case, from the SNAP survey, we can at least ask, are they engaged in their community? Do they volunteer? Do they give money? Right? So if they're so focused on their own individual pursuits and ideas, they might not be as likely to be engaged. So 2% of the general public has volunteered for a cultural organization. 37% of arts graduates have volunteered. Again, this is a cultural organization, so you'd think that arts graduates would be more interested in volunteering for a cultural organization, but they're 15 times more likely to do it. Only 6% of the general public earning under $100,000 has given to the arts. 40% of arts graduates have given. Again, that may not be unexpected, but the point is that arts graduates are volunteering at high rates. They're giving at high rates. Yeah.
So this volunteering, to be in the arts, it's often, internships are often unpaid, or the way to get into a place is to volunteer. That's common knowledge in the arts economy. So how is that? Is this really evidence that they're engaged in generous, or is this evidence that
they're being exploited?
Well, they're being exploited, or they're trying to advance their careers, and that it's not really volunteering as much as sort of spec work.
Yeah. So I don't know that, although we do have a question in the survey about whether they've done unpaid internships. So we could control for that and rerun the numbers, which I think I'll do. I think it's a good suggestion. I suspect a small percentage of this might be accounted for by that, but I wouldn't think that's going to make that number go down significantly. But I'll test that. It's a good point.
I think the main point is that it's a self-interested, even if they're not an unpaid internship, it's a self-interested engagement. It's not an altruistic engagement.
But it is engagement, right? So if the idea is artists are either kind of not engaged in their community, they're working independently, or they're volunteering, they're giving money. The real one here is teaching, right? Which I don't have a number, but 60% of arts graduates have taught at some point in their lives. And so I consider they may be doing it self-interestedly because they have to make money, right? But teaching is a pretty significant form of engagement with a community, passing on, your knowledge. They are independent. I'm sure they're working in their studios, their labs. Their studios. They're making music. Sometimes on their own, they're composing, they're writing, but they're also highly engaged people. They're engaged in their community. And some of it's self-interested, some of it's not, but they're not disengaged yet.
Well, and to your second point, so 40% art graduates have given. If you're in the arts, say if you're in dance, you're obviously going to pay to go to see other dance recitals, or you're going to invest in that community. Sort of like, if you work in banking, you're going to use.
Sure.
It's.
So that that could be the kind of in-kind, right? I don't think the sort of arts economy where you're paying for tickets for one another, you're going to each other's shows, wouldn't be considered giving to the arts philanthropically. They may be giving to the arts because it's supporting their industry, right? So again, I'm not saying these are not self-interested acts. So that the mythology is not that artists are selfish and not and always self-interested, but I guess the point that we're finding from the survey is that these SNAP respondents are, and we want to find better comps. So there is some good from Indiana, some good studies of volunteering, which is where I took the 2%. And maybe the question is not have you volunteered for an arts organization, but have you volunteered, period. And that would be a better comp. Okay, artists as an occupational group tend to be more tolerant and more socially progressive, which is actually true. If you look at the GSS, as an occupational group, more likely to be, they do better on the questions of tolerance, and they're more likely to be Democrats, whether or not you think that's progressive. I'll let you decide. Therefore, you might imagine artistic occupations are characterized by less inequality. So we're finding pretty strong inequality in the arts professions by gender and race and ethnicity. And again, those of you that work in the arts, you know, this is not going to be a shock to you. But again, I'm trying to sort of push back against some of the common perceptions. So this is some evidence from SNAP. Percentage of aspiring artists who ever or currently work as artists. So more men who wanted to be artists become artists than women. More men are currently, so this is have you ever worked as an artist? This is currently work as an artist. In each case you see a statistically significant advantage. And this is percentage earning more than $50,000 in the previous year from their artwork. Okay, these are pretty significant numbers. And again, I don't know what the wage gap is in other professions, but I think that looks to me to be higher than other professions. If someone has those numbers, let me know. This is looking at ethnicity. What I thought was interesting about this is the role of debt here. So a greater percentage of white graduates end up working working as artists if they aspire to be artists. So about 20% of all arts graduates didn't ever want to be artists. They just wanted to study the art in school, but they never intended to be an artist. But of those that wanted to be artists, 60% of whites and 53% of blacks. If you take away the debt factor, then actually more black graduates end up working as artists than whites do. So debt is clearly a factor. And we have a question that says, if you stop working in the arts, what are the reasons? And we see that minorities are much more likely to say debt is what drove them out of a career in the arts. Satisfaction with a sense of belonging in school. So we have a whole bunch of questions about what actually happened at school, what was your experience like, and again, we see some differences by ethnicity, with blacks feeling less strong in terms of sense of belonging than their white classmates. Things that I think art schools need to be attentive to. Myth 10, every additional PowerPoint slide increases audience engagement and interest. That's obviously not true. So, I think the question is, what does it matter whether these myths continue to exist in public discourse, in our news, in our media? When the Georgetown report came out a couple of years ago, NPR immediately did a story of they found a young woman who had graduated from art school who was bitter and resentful and working in a fish restaurant as a waitress, and affirming how terrible a decision it was to choose an artistic life, how hard it was, how unlikely it was to lead to an artistic career. So these mythologies continue to influence how we report on the arts, how we advise our children, our nephews, our nieces about what they should study or can study in school, about how we teach in art schools, about the difference between being specialized or generalist, or the importance of having some enterprise or work, management, business skills. So in terms of our cultural policies, our perceptions of an artist's life and an artist's career have had a great influence. And I think we're trying to take this information along with lots of other data that's coming in about what an artistic career looks like, and have a more honest conversation about the needs of the artist. So we could open up to, I'd be interested to know, if, given some of these findings, what does that mean for policy? What would that mean for how we support artists, how we think about arts training, what kind of research we need to do? Yeah.
Thanks for this. This is fantastic. I am a program director in careers in journalism, arts, and media here. And this is my colleague, my counterpart in innovation and entrepreneurship. I have a background in music performance, and a lot of what you've been talking about rings a bell. In fact, I just brought a group of 20 students to New York, and we did a 3-day trek to different places in arts, journalism, and media. One of the places was a jazz club that's in fact doing quite well through its ability to monetize through subscriptions and digital broadcasts throughout the world. And we had our students talk with musicians who were performing, who basically stopped in the middle of the set and talked with them. And the woman who was a tap dancer said, you know, we had a rough time like everyone else in the economic downturn, but for us, we were okay because we always have a rough time. We always are building networks. It wasn't any different for us. That's a small kind of example of what begs a larger question. Obviously, I think all of us in this room want national attention on arts and arts training. I'm pessimistic that that will come from the powers that be in government and politics because of arts for art's sake. And frequently the arguments that have the most traction have to do with, I think in Chicago is a case, arts and gentrification and development. We're seeing that all over the country. But in what your slides and what you've been talking about have shown that there is a kind of convergence going on, and part of it is what I'm working on with Jerry, arts and entrepreneurship, that teaching nimbleness and resilience and being connected into large networks as artists have to be, that there's a great economic power and lesson in that, that speaks to what every other industry is now finding out, in law and in medicine, that you have to have those skills. So what I'm really interested in hearing about from you is how is this, all of this great data being harnessed in a larger sense towards putting pressure on, governmental pressure perhaps, to bear on greater funding for the arts or support for the arts. And I'm just curious,
Yeah.
It's a big question, but what that's looking like now.
So I don't think this necessarily says that we need more funding for the arts. I mean, I think maybe you could make that argument. I think what this says is that there's a lot of people that want to be artists. It's a viable career path. Artists graduate with a variety of skill sets that are actually quite useful in our current economy and in solving some of the complex problems we face, urban problems, ecological problems, health problems. So I think it's not a bad degree to get. And
so
actually,
it sounds like you're saying it is going to provide more funding for art schools by bringing in more students if
yes.
the word gets out.
Then that
Be
would
able
be
to sell arts education
right.
to
So then that's
consumers.
But to be fair to me, I was making that argument before I was going to be a dean of an art school. So it's consistent. It's consistent, Larry. I think the real questions are then in this world where, even if they don't increase, we're still graduating 129,000 arts graduates a year in visual and performing arts, right? That's a lot of people. Art schools are doing okay. I mean, I don't think they, even if they don't get any more enrollments. The question is, are we providing the support structures so that these graduates can most effectively engage with enterprise, with public policy, with education. And so, I mean, I think there are interesting things to think about, like risk, right? So the entire economy is changing from placing risk on organizations and corporations to placing risks on workers, right? That's the post-industrial economy. As you're a contract worker, you're covering your own health, you're taking risks to fund your own projects like Theaster does and hope that from those funded projects you can, you'll see some revenue streams. But the risk is on the worker's back. So how do you reduce that risk for all these independent contractors? What kinds of new collective possibilities are there for artists to share costs, for artists to, you see artist cooperatives where they all donate, right, paintings, and as those paintings sell over the years, the proceeds are shared. Is that a good idea? Does it work? I don't know. Ways of creating micro markets for artists, right? Rather than thinking about an artistic career needs to have some kind of mass market, And maybe the gallery scene has always been organized around micro markets, but in the music world, increasingly artists are succeeding by having house concerts, right? They go around and they do about 30 house concerts across the country where someone invites them in, they stay at their house, they invite 50 people, it's a covered dish, people pay $15 to come, and the artist takes all those proceeds. And they're actually piecing together careers by doing that. So I think the real question is, how do we support these other structures that allow enterprising independent artists to connect with one another, to share risk, to find investors, to find micro markets. That's where we have to be smart. And some cities are doing a good job of that. I think they really are thinking about those kinds of strategies. A lot of them are not really, they're kind of stuck on pretty old models of, okay, we just need some artist housing, or we need to invest in traditional nonprofit cultural organizations, and that will somehow kind of trickle down to supporting the artist. So I guess that's where my policy interest would be, is sort of where the rubber hits the road around work. What does it mean to work as an artist in this post-industrial economy? And where are they being abused? I think the unpaid internships is a huge issue, right? And that further, the inequality that I was showing around outcomes is heightened by this issue, which is who can afford to do an unpaid internship? It may not even be a summer now. You might have to do it for a year or 2 years, right? So those are policy issues that I'd want to try to tackle. Yeah.
So I've more of an education policy question, because I was taken by your comment early on about those that pursued an arts degree as well as a science degree fared better in terms of kind of average income. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, there's an aspect of further teaching entrepreneurial skills, the business management skills to artists who are interested in pursuing kind of arts, somewhat for art's sake, that's a little bit of a crude definition, versus marrying the artistic processes and that comfortableness with ambiguity with science, with other fields, to tackle some of the more kind of social and civically engaged projects that you described. And I'm just wondering, from a curricular perspective, if you have examples of what that looks like, of marrying arts and artistic processes with other fields, or what your vision for that might be.
So there are some great examples of artists that successfully work curricularly across the curriculum. Like Liz Lerman is a great example, who will go in and work with a biologist, where the students actually will physically inhabit the movement of cells in order to learn that better. And that has some evidence that they do, in fact, learn it better when they're kinetically involved in the learning process. It's not happening sort of systematically in the curriculum. It's more likely to happen at the graduate level or among faculty who sort of are engaged in a lab space together. So there's, the sort of art-science nexus. That's kind of hot. And so there's lots of, so at least a dozen universities I can think of that do a pretty good job of funding these kinds of projects. And I think we do hear from the scientists that the artistic process, there's a lot, it's like a Venn diagram. There's a lot that artists do that are very similar to the way a scientist approaches problem solving. And there are things that are very different about those processes. And one thing that artists do that scientists are not as good at is dealing with the ambiguity, right? So in the curriculum, in this Teagle survey I did of college seniors, we asked seniors to think about their major and how often a range of things happens in their major. And so we asked about 10 questions that got at creativity in one way or another. So how often are you allowed to take an assignment in a new direction? How often are your assignments ambiguous? How often do you make connections across assignments? How often does an assignment leave you curious and wanting to know more about it? And the arts do, the differences are staggering, right? So 3% of biology majors say that ambiguity is part of their coursework versus like 80% of artists, right? So we know that. I didn't know that. I knew the artists were, but I would have thought the biology majors would have been higher than that. So it's not happening. So I think there's something that sciences can gain from the arts and something the arts can gain from the sciences. But one of the things the sciences gain is this open space of sort of playful inquiry. And when you talk to scientists who've been part of these collaborative projects, that early stage of, let's do some problem searching. Let's not decide we know what the problem is. Actually, let's spend some time generating different ways of framing the problem. Let's be agnostic about what methods we can use. Let's use whatever tools might help us get there. Let's do, let's envision, let's imagine. Let's ask sort of conditional questions. What if we did this? And So I think the artistic process has a lot to contribute to other disciplines and vice versa. But right now, there's no university that I know of that has systematically figured out a way to integrate that kind of learning across the campus. So, we had the writing across the curriculum movement, which has generally been pretty successful. So the idea that you don't only learn how to write by taking that freshman English class, which when I was in college, everybody, you had to do that. Now you can get those writing credits by taking a variety of different classes, but learning about writing in history class or in philosophy or even in a science class sometimes. So the question is, what would creativity across the curriculum look like? And could we, is that the next sort of integrated curriculum frontier that we need to push? Yeah, Terry.
Following up on your last comment about integration and overlap, how about trying to ask what's the source of the myth and where may be some elements of it that are supported? And I think of two sort of extreme cases. One is the World Values Survey, which where we've been analyzing how, and they have a couple of items. One is participation, one is membership.
Yeah.
But it shows a roughly a doubling in the number of Americans who were active in the arts over the last 18 years. Just the opposite of the sort of the NEA stable or decline. One answer is that there are lots of people who are doing a little bit, even though they're mainly lawyers or doctors or whatever, but they're dancing on the weekend. Second, if you focus, say, as a strong counter alternative, that is, you focused on graduates of art schools. What if you, in another extreme, further extreme, if you only look at graduates of physical education programs and compared that to everybody who played ball with their kids? That is, lots of people play ball, lots of people paint on the weekend, they do watercolors, they sketch and so forth, but they don't say they work as an artist. They say, I enjoy doing some art work and activity, but I'm mainly a doctor, I do other things as well.
Absolutely.
So you get very different numbers depending on how what the base is. And using art school graduates is certainly, the presentation, the findings, all this is dynamite. There are lots of them. But if you maybe look for a way to take it a step further and say, how can we bring in that myth? Was it just Balzac and Baudelaire and so forth? And what else could we add? Another just quick example, say Wicker Park and Rich Lloyd's couple of chapters on how do artists support themselves. His answer is they work as waitresses and bartenders. Then he has a whole explanation of why they continue supporting each other, because the other nights when they're off, Thursday and Tuesday, they go to their friends who are also bartenders and waitresses, or say bartenders. They get drunk. They're so drunk that they can't do any art. So he's got a self-denying prophecy of why the artists don't get any better, based on the sort of now maybe is it a myth? It's true of a few people now. But he, at least in that case study of the leading arts neighborhood in Chicago, it's seen as a dynamic rationale for artists not being able to break out of the waitress kind of job.
Yeah.
So I'm simply suggesting maybe taking a few of these, not saying they're simply totally wrong, but trying to contextualize. Right. And
well, I love I'll try and address both of them. So the first one is what we would call sort of the pro-am revolution, professional amateurs, and it's not only in the arts, it's in sciences. People who have the tools and technologies and capacities now to be a weekend warrior, and they always have, but there's some evidence that's grown. If you look at like the International Music Manufacturers Association, the sort of the instrument retailers, they've seen an increase in the number of people that have bought guitars and are playing guitars. So I think there's evidence of that, and in fact that's what I've written a lot about. I think the interesting question then is, what does that mean for policy, right? So if everybody's doing art and it's part of people's everyday lives. It's not rare, and it's accessible, and people are doing it. And you look at the number of YouTube videos, and it's clear that people are making stuff and sharing stuff and talking about stuff. So in some ways, it's a creative revolution. We have art everywhere. So what's the policy issues? So on the one hand, from a university standpoint, one of the policy issues is those kids can't get into the art classes. Right, that's just a small matter, right? They go to college, they've been doing art, they want to keep doing art, they can't get any studio time because those art schools are precious. They try and protect their spaces and places for those that are going to be professional artists. I think that's a mistake. But the larger question is, you could take the sports metaphor, right? And there were actually policy interventions that supported amateur sports, right? Title IX would be, I would say, a policy intervention that supports Title IX.
Making sure
Yeah.
that women's sports.
Yeah, but I mean that's an intervention.
Like sports, think it was a bad thing for college sports, but
But it was a policy intervention, not around professional sports,
right.
but around collegiate sports, most of whom aren't going to be professionals, or rec centers, right? Building tennis courts, building hiking trails. I mean, these are cities and governments have decided that there are ways to intervene to encourage amateur sports, bike lanes. That may be for commuting, it may be for bicyclists, but the point being, if we look at the history of the way we've intervened in the arts in this country, it's pretty hard to find significant policy interventions around amateur sports. Around amateur arts and art making. And I don't think we've had a conversation in this country yet, although we're kind of sniffing around about what that would look like. You could have, instead of the NEA, instead of giving money to nonprofit arts organizations to support professional artists, you could have given people arts vouchers to get arts lessons anywhere they wanted to. Maybe that would have built a healthier arts ecology now than we have. There have been more people participating, more people interested in professional arts. I don't know.
Joining some of your numbers with the NEA numbers on participation. So they count the number of people who go to a museum, who go to an opera, go to a symphony, and then how does all of that artistic activity in the broadened version, which include people sewing together, knitting together, making quilts together, how does that compare to arts graduates? And I would think it must be much, much bigger.
Yeah, arts graduates. Well, no, arts graduates are more likely to say they participate in the arts than the average citizen. But I think it's also important to think about how many arts graduates are presenting their art, whether they're getting paid or not, in some public way. And again, the numbers are well over half. So a lot of those activities that people are going to are being presented by artists who may not be getting paid as professional artists. So much of the activity is happening in schools. You're going to see your kids play or your kids concert. So another way I think these arts graduates are contributing to community is they are in fact the ones in part that are presenting a lot of the local and often non-paid opportunities for people to engage.
How about just poets?
Yeah.
I can't believe that many poets who are earning $100,000 a year or even $30,000 a year as poets.
Yeah.
Try 3,000.
The poets aren't going to be don't have a high median income.
Qua poets. So if you're choosing a BA, maybe say I'm going to get a BA in biology or in business, but I'm going to write poetry on the side.
Or you get a BA in poetry and you do business. Go into business. The point is that those poetry graduates are not. They're plucky. They're employable. They're doing stuff. They're doing some poetry and they're doing work that they say their poetry degree is related to, even if it's not writing poetry.
I took the survey. I don't remember. Was there a question about was there any point in time did you go to New York or LA, one of the big centers, or London or whatever, and then go back to your place of?
So what
I'm getting at is there was that slide where you said within 5 years people decided to make their career in school. But just anecdotally from people I know, there are plenty of people who went to New York, within a couple of years came right back.
Yeah.
I mean, and so within 5 years, they came back to settle in Chicago and continued on their career, but they made some,
Still, yeah.
there was
Took
some.
a shot.
It took a shot. And so there's a PhD candidate at Vanderbilt is writing about off-centered arts worlds, and he's doing Portland and Nashville as a case study. But what he finds is that there's this translocal thing happening, which is that they are invested in building their own city as a legitimate site of cultural production and branding it so that being a Nashville artist or a Chicago artist means something. But they are kind of keeping their eye on the ball in New York and paying attention to those trends and still seeking opportunities to be shown in those galleries and to connect with the New. So it's not that New York and LA are no longer relevant, but if you look at the majority of how they're actually spending their lives and where their networks are and where their opportunities are, a lot of those are local. So it's not New York is not irrelevant, but you know, I think it's a much more complicated and diverse. And I think a real interesting question would be, what are the advantages and disadvantages? What can you do as a visual artist in Nashville, where the scene is pretty thin? What's different about that than being a visual artist in New York City or being in theater? I mean, those they lead to different kinds of ways of doing your work. And I don't think we know enough about that yet. We know that artists, we're looking at migration patterns. We know that artists are moving in and out of all kinds of cities. There's lots of mid-sized cities that are becoming sort of hot spots for artists. I don't think we really know what's the difference of making an artistic life and building an artistic community in these off-center cities yet. Most of the research is still in New York. You know, just very few serious studies of artists in these smaller mid-sized cities. So we need to do more of that. Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. It's a very inspiring talk. So you mentioned the policy aspect, and one thing I'm thinking about is the municipal policy or the local policy in terms of building art districts, because we don't see official art district in every city. Some city has that, some cities have that, and some cities do not. So for instance, as far as I know, although Chicago is a very vibrant city in terms of local arts, I don't think there is an official art district sponsored by the municipal government. But in some smaller cities like Dallas, for instance, they do have a municipal art district sponsored by the local government. So I'm thinking this kind of policy variation probably can have some impact in terms of the different indicators for the art community that you mentioned. So it's something maybe to think about or something to explore.
And I suspect, I mean, I haven't done a lot of work on arts districts, but they're not all the same. Like what policies and levers create an art? So sometimes it's just a tax issue, right? That if you're an arts organization in this area, you don't pay taxes. Sometimes it's.
Well, I mean, I would have thought your answer would be yes. There are different kinds of arts districts, but our research suggests that policy around arts districts should be the same as policy towards relating arts to other disciplines. That is to say, if you're going to do a district, do an arts and design district, do an arts and certain kinds of sciences.
Yes.
See whether if you bring these people in the same place, there'll be spillover effects and job.
Yeah, I love that.
So
yeah. I think that's right. I mean, I think we're stuck in pretty old paradigms. So an arts district means figuring out a way to support nonprofit
and we do have the theater district.
Arts in, through other, rather than direct subsidy, through other policy levers. But I don't think we're really thinking about the artist as a worker. We're not really thinking about new ways in which artists are working outside of those nonprofit. I mean, why does it have to even be institutionally based, right? Is there a way to incentivize these kinds of temporary collaborations, right, rather than incentivizing permanent infrastructure? I mean, part of the challenge we've had in the arts is that all of our policies have incentivized building, and now we are having trouble sustaining all those buildings. I'm not sure whether building is necessarily the answer to a healthy, vibrant cultural scene or a lively cultural space where creative workers can find interesting collaborations, opportunities to work on projects that they're interested in, ways to work on solving community problems if that's the kind of art that they want to do. So I think actually rethinking what a cultural district along the lines that Larry began to talk about would be a really interesting thing for a city to organize a conversation around. Yeah, I mean, I think there's still ways to incentivize, but can we do it in a way that doesn't shackle us to these old models of support for nonprofit institutions?
Chicago did have a plan for the Cermak district. I don't know whatever happened to that, but they bought a building and they were going to have a combination of artists on one floor and then tech designers on another floor. I'm not sure if it ever got.
That's the Creek Barrel area, or Creek Barrel, or the same?
No, I don't think so. It's Cermak.
Yeah,
There's a name for it.
Okay.
Arts Industrial District.
I think the more, I mean, to just follow up a little bit more on, I mean, I've used the metaphor of kind of the gilded ghetto for the way we think about arts policy, which is that we want to kind of see the arts as separate and distinctive, and then we want to advocate for as much resources as we can for that distinctive sector. And I think a much better way going forward is to be aggressively integrating, to think about all the places where and it's not just the arts for the benefit of health or for the benefit of urban development. It's actually the way artists want to work, right? Many of them. And there's still going to be the artists that want to work, on their expressive act, and they don't really care about connecting it, and they don't really care about interdisciplinarity or collaboration. That's fine. That may not be where I'd put public dollars, right? If they can find patronage or they can sell their work, great. But when you think about what is the role of a city or a federal government or a state government or our foundations that get tax relief for their, where should they be investing their money? What's the public interest? I think if you ask it that way, it opens up, I think, a broader conversation around policy.
So building on that, but I'm still a little hung up on the curricular aspect of this. But I was thinking about if you have any information that separates undergraduate degrees from graduate degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if we're saying that perhaps an undergraduate degree can teach the artistic and creative processes, then someone pursues a graduate degree in something else, business, sciences, whatever it might be. For a public dollar, maybe you're saying, okay, I'll give you a tuition reduction if you come in with a BA in some sort of arts field and you come into something else, thinking that you're marrying the creative processes with these additional entrepreneurial or other avenues of integrating the creative process. And I'm just wondering if you have any data from your work that separates the undergraduate from graduate degrees and how that plays out.
And we do have most of the reports we've done looks at the differences, and they're all, the graduate degrees are always just a few percentage points higher on almost everything, but they're more or less, the outcomes are pretty similar. I mean, I think the question is, how would you incentivize?
I'm just thinking about if this notion of integration.
Right.
How do you foster that in the training of these individuals, whether they're calling themselves artists or not, but they're interested in the artistic disciplines and everything that comes along with that. And maybe they want to apply it in a different policy area or other outcome area. So I was thinking about incentives of how do you foster that?
Yeah. So I mean, I would think about it in a number of ways. First of all, there are a lot of artists that are double majoring in another field, and we do a terrible job of helping them integrate those majors. In fact, that's another project that I've been working on. Double majors is probably the biggest curricular change in American higher education in the last 20 years, and no one's advocated for it. No one said don't do it. It's just happened because that's what students have wanted to do, and they're trying to maximize the value of their education. But when we actually look at what happens, most of them say, yeah, I get some creative benefits from these two domains of knowledge, but it's in spite of the systems in place, because if I want to write an honors thesis that connects those two, actually I have faculty from both departments that are, actively telling me they don't want me to do it, or they can't do it, or they don't want to work. They don't want to sit in a room with a faculty member from another department to advise this thesis, right? So I mean so that's one area I would say. Look, we already have, 20% of our students are double majoring. More for the arts. More art students are double majoring than science students are. So let's figure out how we can make that better. I think the other thing is to think if you're going to have an arts degree and you're going to go to law school, or you're going to want to apply to medical school, to really think about what can you do to maximize your chances. So how can we in the curriculum give you an opportunity to do a senior project that's not so rooted in your discipline, which is where we tend to drive our art students, because they have to demonstrate mastery, right? But if you want to go to law school, maybe you should do a project in your senior year that's at the intersection of law and art to make yourself a more credible candidate. And right now, that's not how we encourage those. We don't encourage those kinds of projects. So I would think those are two ways that, that at least through the curriculum, we could encourage or at least allow. It's not even encouraging. The students, many of the students want to do that kind of work. We penalize them.
Yeah.
Well,
Provocative as always, so thank you. It gives us some just question about the terminology, and maybe that's what's driving the myths, is that art, the myths are driven a lot on the idea of high art, fine art,
Yep.
the traditional sense of just studio production, and that it's kind of more about culture now. It's just everything is with creativity.
Yep.
And that art is a very divisible pursuit. You can focus 100% on art, or you can use little bits and pieces of it in various different parts of your social, professional, political
Yep.
life. And it becomes interesting questions of just, so what are we talking about when we talk about art and artists, and what do we want to create policy or to promote? Is it around just cultural participation? I mean, the NEA study is sitting in a sewing circle, an artistic undertaking, or is it a creative undertaking, or is it a social undertaking? And do those definitions matter? But they're certainly changing. They're not sort of the old idea of just the high arts.
I think it's a great question. I mean, when I think about, should we have policies that support artists, I also think, should we have policies that support small aviators? Right? There's all kinds of occupations that are not, that don't have a lot of resources, and where the stakeholders wish there were more resources, but the government doesn't get involved in supporting every occupational group. So, in that way, I'm sort of skeptical of saying let's take artists out of the equation. I'd rather pursue, this is just my own preference, I'd rather pursue, public policies and figure out, and I think artists, so if the public policy is public spaces. I want a city where people leave their homes and they join together. So that can happen through sports, that can happen in churches, that can happen in through arts festivals. But that's the policy objective. And then I want to think about how does it, in what ways do the arts provide unique opportunities that might be different from those other areas? But it's not about supporting the arts, right? It's about supporting a larger cultural objective or a larger policy objective. I think for me, is recognizing that I think the artistic process has some real advantages that are not present in other areas. And so we benefit when we include artists in those kinds of, in those policy objectives. We see the arts as a contributor.
The thing I've heard, though, is that the contribution is innovation. Is that it? I mean, that you're going to get more.
We have to break?
We're going to have a really quick answer, and we have to evacuate for the next class coming
Okay.
Sorry. Give us a...
I'm just glad to be part of an evacuation today. That's what I was hoping for. Okay, so no. So innovation would be one policy objective, right? But another policy objective is healthy communities, whatever that looks like, or civic engagement, or international understanding, or sustainability. All those are reasonable policy objectives, and I think the arts are relevant in all those cases. And we don't. That's not what cultural policy means in this country, though. And I think that would be a great discussion. Like, should cultural policy be for the arts, or should it be about the arts for public life? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.